KWT slaying.
Well, family, the wait is over. The moment has arrived where truth emerges triumphant from the shadows of history. Introducing the true Jerusalem, the lost kingdoms of the Israelites, the groundbreaking work by me, Jacoby Vale, a journey into the past that reshapes the future. I cut through centuries of misconceptions with piercing clarity. This book delivers a compelling case packed with evidence that commands attention and gonna get some respect. Come with me for a second, family, and discover how these thrilling civilizations flourished, protected by towering highlands and sustained by advanced engineering. Some have asked, where is Jerusalem? Is it the land in the Middle East? I say no. It is in the highlands of Ethiopia. With hours of groundbreaking research, this book brings in a new revelation, and it will transform your understanding of African history and its connections to the ancient world. It's going to remove from your mind the conditioning by the Romans of what has really happened to our past. Come with me, family, to the Ethiopian highlands and find out why this is our land. Why things have been hidden and obfuscated for centuries. We are royalty, children of the Most High. What kind of land do you expect us to have? Dried up dirt in the Middle East, or land flowing with rivers? A land full of beautiful animals flowing with milk and honey. Don't miss out on this monumental unveiling. Grab your copy today and stand on the side of truth. Visit Amazon.com or www.tailministries.com to purchase your book and join Jacoby Vale's teachings on Tail Ministries. Family, your journey to a hidden history has now begun. So family, get your copy of True Jerusalem, the Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites today. Journey to the heart of Africa, where history and legend converge to reveal the forgotten kingdoms of the Israelites and the true location of Jerusalem. Salam, my family. Salam, how y'all doing today? Hope you're blessed and highly favored. So great read, Teyu, Yakoba. Enjoying it tremendously. I'd say this case is closed. I agree. I think where the real Jerusalem is, I think the case is closed. I mean, if you read the book. And the group that I'm with, the AIC group, we meet, pretty much every Saturday or every other Saturday. And we come up with more and more evidence, right? Where the Sea of Galilee is, the proof for the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it's a trip. It's a trip. I'm like, if you just spend half the time doing the research, yeah, the case is closed, right? So we're going to talk about Gog and Magog. I was working on this like a week or two. So what I have is a little long. And is going to be posted as an article on the tailministries.com website. So if you want to go read it for yourself, you can. But like with everything, we have to reevaluate what we have learned from Christendom. And the reason being is, we know there's a lot of stuff wrong with Christianity, but we have to understand that this whole dynamic and the understanding of what's happening and what is going to happen prophetically is based upon the true Israelites. It's the true Israelites. So, for instance, you know what the Bible says, they parted my land? Well, we know that's Africa, right? And so, and there's a whole reason for it. So, you know, if you don't understand that, then that's your issue, right? That's your problem. But there's a lot of scriptures, you know, from the captivity, Deuteronomy 28, to the transatlantic slave trade, even to the Inquisition, to our current captivity and oppression. Everything ties to us. So you won't be able to understand who Gog and Magog is because, like with everything in the Bible, one, it takes revelation. Two, you have to look at the nuances. Okay. So I'm not saying that everyone, you know, their positions and teachings on Gog and Magog is wrong in their positions. But I believe that what the scriptures is talking about is more nuanced, right? And so what I'm going to show you today is just some research I was doing, working on, and who I think Gog and Magog is. Now, you're going to find out right away who I think Gog and Magog is, but it's the thread that ties it all together, right? It's the threads that make it make sense. Okay. All right. Is that big enough for y'all? Let's see, right there. Maybe right there better. Okay. So, as you can see, Britain, France, and the prophecy of Gog and Magog. Historical, biblical, and cultural connections. So, you could tell already who I think Gog and Magog is. Britain and France. Oh, how you come up with that, Jacoba? You'll see. All right. So Gog is described as a leader of a great invasion against Yahuwah's people, and Magog as the land or people allied with him. So there's people allied or who are allies of Gog, right? Ezekiel 38-39 portrays Gog as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal in the land of Magog, summoned with a vast coalition from throughout the world to invade true Israel. So when we look at the prophecies of Gog and Magog, we have a few questions we have to ask ourselves as we go through, right? So this army advances like a cloud covering the earth to plunder and loot defenseless communities. So what is the purpose of the Gog and Magog war? To what? Plunder and loot, right? All right. So all of this is important. And it ties into the historicity of the Bible, of the scriptures, of the Israelites, of the Ezra Alawi, right? So Yahuwah intervenes with disaster to destroy Gog's forces, vindicating his holiness. In the New Testament, the book of Revelation applies Gog and Magog to a final rebellion after 1,000 years of peace. Satan rallies Gog and Magog, the nations in the four corners of the earth, to besiege the camp of the saints and the beloved city, Jerusalem. They are ultimately consumed by fire from heaven. These passages emphasize Gog and Magog as end-time enemies commanding multinational hordes. Keep all that in mind. That encircle Yahuwah's people for the purpose of seizing spoil and destroying the holy city. Any historical analogy to Gog and Magog must involve what? Far-reaching military alliances, mass plunder, and antagonism toward the true Israelites and their Jerusalem in the Ethiopian highlands. Note that in Revelation 20, Gog and Magog is identified only as a horde from around the world and not a specific geolocation. So when you go look at Revelation 20, you see that Gog and Magog is really all these nations from around the world. But here's the thing. All of this ties into the wrath of Yahuwah. It ties into the vengeance. It ties into Joel chapter 3. For what? For what you did to my people. Who? Ezra Alawi, who we call Israel, right? Or some call Israel. The real name is Ezra Alawi, right? That's what they call themselves. That's what it is. That's who we are. All right. So Keep these things in mind. So why Britain and France? Why, right? Why does this make sense? I'm going to tell you, when you look at all of the history and you start bringing all this stuff together, all of it starts to make sense. Even, like I say, the location of true Jerusalem and what happened in Ethiopia and, you know, what's happening on the continent, all of it comes together because why? Nothing stands alone. Nothing stands in isolation. Why? Because there's nothing new under the sun. What was is what shall be. There's nothing new under the sun. All right. So Gog and Magog, some people say it's Russia, and we're going to see why Russia more than likely is not Gog and Magog and not associated with it. Why? Historically, Russia has been our ally. They've helped Africa to shake off the colonizers, right? Even today, they're helping Ibrahim Traore. So Russia has never invaded us and enslaved us, right, as a people. But then all of a sudden, this is supposed to flip. Nah, it's more complex than that. And I'm going to show you. So legends of Gog and Magog in British culture. Y'all can see that, right? It says, long before modern prophecy debates, Britain's own folklore entwined itself with Gog and Magog. In medieval legend, Gog Magog was a giant chieftain in Albion, Britain, who was defeated by the Trojan warrior Brutus' champion. Corinius, the Lord Mayor's show, well, that's a reference. According to the tale and recorded by Geoffrey Monmouth, Brutus, the mythical founder of London, vanquished the race of giants that populated early Britain. The defeated giants Gog and Magog were brought to London as captives and made to stand guard at the city's gates. The legend persisted into tradition to this day. Wooden effigies, y'all see that? Wooden effigies, right? Where did I leave off at here? Okay, let's start here. The defeated giants, Gog and Magog, were brought to London as captives and made to stand guard at the city's gates. This legend persisted into tradition to this day. Wooden effigies of Gog and Magog are prominent in London's Guildhall and are paraded each year as the symbolic guardians of the city of London. The giants even feature in the Lord Mayor's show, carried as giant wicker figures named Gog and Magog at the head of the procession. British culture thus appropriated Gog and Magog as part of its own origin story. Mighty foes from whom the British claimed victory and legitimacy. The very names Gog and Magog became linked to London's identity, the heart of the British Empire, an ironic twist given that in prophecy, these names represent the enemies of Yahuwah's people. Britain's Gog and Magog lore shows a cultural familiarity with biblical symbols, even casting Britain in the role of conqueror over Gog and Magog. Yet, as we shall see, the historical connections of Britain and its ally, France, align them not with saintly victors, but with the prophesied aggressors themselves. All right, so let's look at this right quick.
Sculptor David Evans puts the finishing touches to two old friends of Londoners, Gog and Magog. 12 years ago, effigies of the two giants were destroyed when the city's Guildhall was blitzed. But now, exact replicas copied from models are all set to go back to town to take their place. Outside Guildhall, where Gog and Magog have made their home since the reign of Henry V, crowds welcome their return. Weighing 3/4 of a ton each and standing 9'3", they dwarf the onlookers. Although no one's sure why they should live in Guildhall at all, it's certainly like old times to have Gog and Magog in London again.
All right, so this is something that they have done and something that they're still doing till this date.
Well, Gog and Magog, one of the most familiar sights at any Lord Mayor show for many, many years. Traditional guardians of the City of London, and they've been carried at the Lord Mayor's show since 1554. The current wickerwork. Gog and Magog. Well, it was wooden statues up until 1708. They were carved. But as you're going to...
All right, so that's Gog and Magog, and you know, this is something that's going to be revisited in the future. So back to the article. All right, from Magog to the West, Migratory Histories of Anglo-Saxons. So y'all remember when we told you all that our biggest enemy is the Anglo-Saxons. Y'all remember that, right? So this all ties together with the history of the British and the French and what they've done to us and what's going to happen in the future. All right, so connecting the British to the Ashkenazi, their Scythian roots and the Khazars. The British royal family, the Ashkenazi, who are Germans, the Scythians, and the Khazars share interconnected historical, biblical, and migration-based links. These connections are found through biblical genealogies, the movement of the Scythians and the Khazar, Ashkenazi influence over European power structures. 1. Biblical connection, Ashkenazi and the Scythians. Ashkenazi is mentioned in Genesis 10:3 as a son of Gomer, who was a son of Japhet. Josephus, 1st century AD, identified Magog with the Scythians, meaning that the Scythians could be linked to both Magog and Ashkenaz. So we have Gog and then we have Magog, Magog being the land, right? Which is where the Khazars are from, which is where the Ashkenaz are from, right? The ones who stole our identity and heritage, right? So the Scythians were a nomadic Indo-European people who migrated from the Eurasian steppe, spreading into Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and eventually into Central Europe. So Ashkenaz equals the early Scythians. The Assyrians called these Scythians Ashkuza, which sounds similar to Ashkenaz. The Scythians dominated the Eurasian steppe 7th to 3rd century BC, an area that later became the homeland of the Khazars. That's where modern Ukraine is, right? Near the Black Sea. All this stuff is coming together. It's starting to make sense what's even happening today between Russian and Ukrainians, right? But anyway, the Scythians, migration and the formation of the Khazars. Over centuries, Scythians descended groups mixed with Turkic tribes in the region that later became Khazaria, modern Ukraine, southern Russia, and the Caucasus. The Khazars, 7th to 10th century AD, were a Turkic people, but many scholars argue they had Scythian and Ashkenazi Jewish roots or influences. The Khazar ruling elite converted to Judaism around the 8th and 9th century AD, creating the first Jewish kingdom outside of true Israel in Africa. Khazars and the Ashkenazi Jews. After the collapse of Khazaria, 10th century AD. Oh, and just in case if we get disconnected, I am streaming live over on Rumble, so y'all could go over there if anything happens. After the collapse of Khazaria, 10th century AD, many Khazars migrated westward into what? Germany. So where did the Khazars go? Into Germany and Eastern Europe. Over time, these populations became known as Ashkenazi Jews, who primarily settled in Germany, Poland, and Central Europe. So the term Ashkenaz is in Jewish tradition became synonymous with Germany. The Ashkenazi migration into England and their role in British power. Ashkenazi Jews in Britain. After 1066 with the Norman conquest, many Ashkenazi Jews from France entered England, invited by William the Conqueror to handle the financial matters. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Ashkenazi Jews were deeply involved in British finance, trade, and royal courts. The British monarchy relied heavily on Jewish financiers to fund wars and expansion. Has anything changed? British royal family and Germanic Ashkenazi roots. The British royal family has German origins. All right, so the Ashkenaz are Germans and the British royal family has German roots. And the Ashkenaz handled the financial money, the money of the royal houses of Britain. All right. So the British royal family had German origins, specifically from the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which ruled German regions heavily populated by Ashkenazi Jews. The House of Hanover, which ruled Britain from 1714 to 1901, had strong connections to Germany, where the majority of Ashkenazi resided. British-German royal intermarriages. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, was from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Germany, further strengthening ties between British royalty and Germanic nobility. King George V, 1917, changed the royal house name from Saxe-Coburg, which is a German name, and Gotha to Windsor due to anti-German sentiment during World War I. So the British family are descendants of Germans. That's who the Anglo-Saxons are. They are Germans. The influence of Ashkenazi banking families in Britain. The Rothschild banking dynasty of Ashkenazi Jewish origin became influential in British financial and political affairs. The Rothschilds funded the British Empire's expansion, controlled banking networks, and were even granted noble titles. Connections. To understand how Britain and France connect to Magog, we must trace the migratory origins of their dominant peoples. The Anglo-Saxons and Franks and related groups like the Germans, Scythians, and Khazars. According to both legend and some scholarly views, many of these groups ultimately sprang from the same stock as Magog in the Bible. Medieval Table of Nations traditions associated Magog with peoples around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, example, Scythians, who later migrated into Europe. Likewise, Gomer, Magog's brother, was seen as father of Ashkenaz, Togarmah, and others who populated Europe and Central Asia. Modern geologists and creation historians note that the Germanic peoples, including Angles, which is the Anglo-Saxons, right? Anglo-Saxons and Franks, trace back to Ashkenaz. They're all Germans. The French are from the Franks. They are Germans. The British are associated with a family called of Gotha or Coburg, or which are Germans. All right, so trace back to Ashkenaz, son of Gomer, son of Japhet. In other words, Anglo-Saxon England and Frankish France came from Japhet's line. The Angles and Saxons who settled Britain were Germanic tribes from northern Europe. Those Germanic peoples came from their ancestor Ashkenaz, a grandson of Japhet. Later Jewish settlers in Central Europe adopted the name Ashkenazi because medieval Jews long recognized Germany as the land of Ashkenaz. What this means is that Britain and France's core populations are what? Japhites. In biblical terms, they are from the same family tree as Magog and his relatives. Moreover, the Scythians, whom Josephus linked to Magog, are an important link in this chain. Scythian and related Sarmatian tribes roamed the steppe from Ukraine to Central Asia in antiquity. And some of these Indo-European groups are believed to have moved westward over centuries, contributing to the ethnogenesis of various European tribes, possibly including elements of the Franks and other Germanic and Slavic peoples. By the time of the Great Migration, which is the 4th to 6th century AD, numerous barbarian peoples of the Scythians or Germanic origin, the Goths and Alans, flooded into Western Roman Empire. So this connects, right, the Ashkenaz to the Roman Empire, right, which Germany was part of the Roman Empire, right? The Habsburgs ruled the Roman Empire as well. The Franks emerged as a Germanic confederation that conquered Gaul, and the Angles and Saxons moved into Britain. Thus, the very people who formed the kingdoms of England and France ultimately hailed from the broad northern nation archetype that the Bible associates with Magog. Another critical piece is the Khazars, a semi-nomadic Turkic people in the Caucasus Volga region who converted to Judaism in the 8th to 9th century. The Khazar Empire claimed descent from Japhet as well. King Joseph of the Khazars, in correspondence around 960 AD, wrote, "We are descended from Japhet through his son Togarmah." He even preserved a tradition that Togarmah, a son of Gomer, Japheth's grandson, had 10 sons who became ancestral founders of tribes. The 7th was Khazar, from whom the Khazar people sprang. This admission means the Khazar saw themselves as part of the Japhite Gomeric family, not Semitic, which is consistent with modern genetic and historical studies of their lineage. The significance here is that a large portion of Eastern European Jewry, the Ashkenazi Jews, may descend in part from those Khazar converts to Judaism. In effect, Ashkenazi Jews are named after Ashkenaz, Japheth's descendant, and history suggests many are literally of Ashkenaz bloodline rather than of the house of Israel. One famous analysis by Kostler noted, the large majority of surviving Jews in the world are the Eastern European descent, and thus perhaps many of Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, and that genetically they are more closely related to the Huns, Uyghurs, and Magyars than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, modern Ashkenazi Jews who spearheaded the Zionist movement in Europe might essentially be Japhites, masquerading as Shemites. This notion of imposter Israelites will be revisited later, but even aside from the Khazar theory, the dominant powers of Europe are firmly rooted in Japheth's line, the very lineage that spawned Gog and Magog in the Table of Nations. Now, all of this comes together and it starts to make sense, right? So to take a spoil, colonial, and remember what I told you, what was is what shall be. To take a spoil, colonialism and slavery through a biblical lens, pretext for Ezekiel 38 and 9. One of the hallmark motives of Gog's prophesied invasion is plunder. Ezekiel emphasizes that Gog will come to take a spoil and prey upon a people dwelling peacefully. The question to ask then is, which nations in history have assembled vast coalitions to invade lands and seize immense spoils? This will illustrate a people who have done in the past what Gog and Magog are predicted to do in the future. The record of the last few centuries unmistakably points to the colonial powers of Western Europe. Britain and France in particular led multinational coalitions that spanned the globe, conquering and exploiting lands across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Their era of expansion, the age of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, mirrors the Gog and Magog scenario in several striking ways. European colonialism was essentially a series of invasions of foreign territories for the purpose of economic gain, to take a spoil. In the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa saw, and remember, the Bible said they parted my land. Here you go, the scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa saw Britain, France, and other European nations, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, oh my goodness, carve up nearly the entire African continent into colonies. This was formalized by the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 85, where 14 countries led by Germany's Bismarck at the behest of Belgium's King Leopold negotiated the Partition of Africa. The result was a carve-up of Africa that plundered the continent's human and natural resources for European profit. By the early 20th century, Britain and France were the dominant colonial overlords in Africa, with Britain controlling vast swaths from Cairo to Cape Town and Nigeria to Kenya, and France ruling much of West and Central Africa. Smaller nations took pieces as well. Like Gog's alliance of many nations, the European powers acted in concert, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating to devour Africa's wealth. Their armies and companies descended upon communities that had never seen such foreign invaders as much as we see Gog coming upon an unsuspecting people dwelling without walls. European empires partitioned Africa during the scramble, 1880 to 1913. By 1913, nearly the entire continent was claimed by Western powers. British territories in red, French in blue, compared to the patchwork of independent African kingdoms. The transatlantic slave trade was another facet of this plunder. From the 1500s through the 1800s, European traders, primarily British, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch, captured and transported millions of African Israelites as slaves to the Americas. The horrific enterprise was driven by greed, a literal taking of spoil in the form of human lives and labor. Not only Christian Europeans, but also some Ashkenazi Jewish merchants played notable roles in this commerce. In fact, Jewish participation in Atlantic slavery was particularly pronounced in Dutch colonies, where Jews at one point controlled up to 17% of the Caribbean slave trade. In colonies like Suriname and Curacao, Sephardic Jews, planters, and traders were deeply involved, owning plantations and trading slaves, such that the slave auctions were even postponed on Jewish holidays. Now, when we talk about this, right, and we talk about the Sephardic, we know who the real Sephardic were, but, you know, hey, your identity was stolen. So y'all get where I'm going. So while they were by no means the only participants, it's significant that Ashkenaz and Sephardic financiers and traders were interwoven with the broader European colonial machine. The British and French, however, were the chief imperial powers running this slave system by the 18th and 19th centuries after earlier Iberian dominance waned. Britain's Royal African Company and France's Compagnie des Indes shipped tens of thousands of African Israelites to the New World plantations. This massive scale of theft of people, of labor, of resources aligns well with Ezekiel's image of Gog's forces gathering to plunder cattle and goods and carry away great booty. What was is what will be. There is nothing new under the sun. That's Ecclesiastes 1:9. The pattern of resource exploitation by Britain and France continued into the modern era and arguably persists today. Neocolonialism. European empires extracted Africa's gold, diamonds, rubber, ivory, oil, and more. Has thou come to take a spoil? Right? To take prey. A vivid example was Britain's 1868 expedition to Magdala, Ethiopia, which, though launched under the pretext of diplomatic rescue, ended with British troops looting huge amounts of Ethiopian treasure and burning Emperor Tawadedo's fortress to the ground. Eyewitness accounts describe the British force having defeated the Ethiopian army, proceeding to plunder the mountain stronghold, seizing hundreds of illuminated manuscripts, crowns, gold, silver crosses, royal jewelry, and other priceless artifacts before setting the place aflame. The stolen treasures were shipped to Britain, some ending up in the British Museum and libraries at Oxford and Cambridge. This incident eerily echoes Gog's narrative, an invasion into the Ethiopian highlands, resulting in the invaders carrying off spoil and prey. Indeed, one Ethiopian commentator bitterly observed of the Magdala raid, what was taken from Magdala was not found there accidentally. We call it looting. Such episodes were repeated across Africa and Asia wherever the British and French went. From the sacking of Benin in Nigeria by the British in 1897 to the plundering of treasures from the Chinese Summer Palace by Anglo-French troops in 1860, Western Europe's powers left a trail of despoiled villages and cities in their imperial wake, just as Gog's horde would do.
Heard of Ethiopia's incredible victory at the Battle of Adwa. In 1896, Ethiopia faced down the might of colonial Italy in a decisive battle that would go down in history. Led by Emperor Menelik II, the Ethiopian forces, equipped with modern weaponry and unparalleled strategy, managed to outmaneuver and overpower the invading Italian army. This stunning triumph was not just a military success, but a powerful symbol of resistance against colonialism. It marked the first time an African nation had decisively defeated a European power, inspiring other colonized nations to fight for their independence. The Battle of Adwa remains a proud moment in Ethiopian history and a testament to the resilience of its people. Have you ever heard of Ethiopia's incredible...
All right, so if one considered the Ethiopian highlands as the true location of Jerusalem, a theory posited by this ministry, The significance grows. Ethiopia, home of the ancient Aksum kingdom, the Falasha Beta Israel, which is Ezra Alawi, and rich traditions linking it to Solomon's lineage via the Queen of Sheba, could be seen as the true Jerusalem that Gog might target. Notably, Ethiopia was one African nation that largely resisted colonialization apart from a brief Italian occupation in the 20th century. Yet Britain and France did encroach around it. British in Sudan and Egypt to the north, French in Djibouti to the east, and Britain's aforementioned Magdala expedition penetrated its heart. All right, so Magdala is the place where Mary Magdalene is from. Just so you know. That's why we say, I mean, if you do the research, you'll be convinced it's 100% that that's the true Jerusalem. That's the true, at least part of the promised land, which is inclusive of sub-Saharan Africa. If Ethiopia were in some sense the camp of the saints or a custodian of Israelite heritage, which it is, the Western aggression against it and wider region takes on a prophetic dimension. Africa as a whole, especially sub-Saharan Africa, has been pillaged by Western Europe for centuries, just as one would expect Gog and Magog to devour the wealth of Yahuwah's people in the last days. The prophecy of Gog's attack to take a spoil and to take a prey. So what are they going for? To take a spoil and to take a prey perfectly aligns with the historical record of European colonialism. Western nations descended with overwhelming force upon lands of the biblical South, intent on robbery and conquest and enslavement. The phrase to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations suggests that the attack is not just on the land, but also on the people who have returned to take a spoil and to take the people once again. The same people who enslaved the Israelites before are going to try again. Let me repeat that. The same people who enslaved the Israelites before are going to try it again. Ashkenazi, Zionism, and the control of European power. A critical angle in identifying Gog and Magog is the role of Ashkenazi Zionism in European imperial strategy and the phenomenon of identity theft of the true Israelites. As established, Ashkenaz, a Japhetic ancestor, gave his name to the Ashkenazi Jews, who by the 19th and 20th centuries comprised the majority of European Jewry. Many of them descended from people outside the land of Israel, including converts like Khazars, nonetheless claimed to be ethnic heirs of ancient Israel. This de facto identity theft, Gentiles taking on the mantle of Yahuwah's chosen people, is remarkably on point for Gog and Magog. In Revelation, Yahuwah rebukes those who say they are Jews and are not, Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, a statement often interpreted as exposing a false claim to Israelite identity. The Ashkenazi-led Zionist movement is a real-world embodiment of that dynamic. By the late 19th century, Zionist leader Theodore Herzl and others, predominantly Ashkenazi, were lobbying European powers to back a plan for a Jewish homeland. In effect, they sought to create a political state claiming the heritage of Israel, even though, as Kessler and others argued, many of these people had no blood descent from the ancient Israelite or the Ezra Alawi. So what we have here is a people, a fake people in a fake land, like I said before, who's also going to have a fake Messiah, right? Who's pretending prophecy is coming to pass for them. If you could hold that question, Exodus is near, till I finish this, I'll answer that question. All right, so Britain and France involvement with Zionism illustrates how European imperial interests and Ashkenazi ambitions worked hand in hand, consistent with Gog and Magog acting in unison. The clearest example is the Balfour Declaration of 1917. In the midst of World War I, as Britain contended with the Ottoman Empire, which ruled Palestine, The British government issued a letter, the Balfour Declaration, supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So the question is, why did they go to the British to get that land? Well, British was controlling Palestine. But also, as I've noted earlier, there's a familial relationship between the British and the Ashkenazi. There's a familiar relationship because they all descended of Japhet and Gomer. So this letter was addressed to Lord Walter Rothschild, a leader of the Britain's Jewish Ashkenazi community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation. In fact, British officials consulted and coordinated with Zionist leaders like Rothschild and Chaim Weizmann in drafting this policy, while pointedly excluding any representation of the native Arab inhabitants of Palestine. Here we see Zionism literally guiding the actions of the British Empire, as we see today, right? They control the U.S. and the British Empire. At British request, Rothschild and Weizmann submitted a draft of the declaration, and the final policy was shaped to suit Zionist interests. The outcome after World War I was that Britain took control of Palestine as a mandate and facilitated Jewish immigration there, laying the groundwork for the future state of a fake Israel. This aligned with the Crusades to establish Palestine as the fake promised land with a fake Jerusalem. So I personally believe that the Crusades wasn't to defend the Holy Land and to defend visitors there. It was to occupy and control Palestine to become the fake Jerusalem. In the context of prophecy, one might view the Western European empires and the Zionist movement as two arms of Gog and Magog, working together to dominate Yahuwah's heritage. The Western nations provided the military might and global reach. The Ashkenazi Zionists provided financial leverage and deceptive claim to Israel's identity. Together, they not only conquered the physical lands of biblical Israel, well, that ain't really our land, but, we did control some of that, and much of Africa, but also hijacked the spiritual identity of Israel. To the descendants of enslaved African Israelites and colonized peoples, many of whom believed themselves to be the true scattered children of Israel, the establishment of a political Israel in 1948 by European Jews was the culmination of an audacious identity theft. It was as if Gog and Magog succeeded in installing a false Zion while keeping the real Jerusalem oppressed, which is the people and the land, but mainly the people, and forgotten. Indeed, Western media and scholarship for years ignored or downplayed the Hebraic claims of Ethiopians and other African peoples, while celebrating the European Israelis as the Jews. This grand deception fits the prophetic pattern of Gog and Magog's attempt to usurp Yahuwah's plan, an attempt that will ultimately fail when truth prevails. Britain and France versus Russia, why Western Europe fits Gog and Magog profile. Considering all of the above, the case becomes strong that Britain and France and their allies fulfill the role of Gog and Magog far more convincingly than Russia does because of their historical actions. Several key points of comparisons can be made. Biblical geography. Gog is said to come from the far north relative to Israel. While many have pointed to Russia on a modern map, in biblical times, north often meant Asia Minor and beyond. The names Meshech, Tubal, and Gomer and Togarmah, Ezekiel 38, 2-6, all refer to people in Asia Minor and the Caucasus. Broadly, the progenitors of Europe and Anatolia. Magog was identified with tribes north of the Black Sea, the Scythians, who migrated into Europe. In essence, the Table of Nations situates Magog's offspring in the Indo-European sphere. Russia is indeed Indo-European or Slavic in part, but much of Russia's territory is actually northeast of Israel and east into Asia. Western Europe lies more directly northwest. Crucially, the British and French peoples emerged from the very Japhetic stocks, Gomer and Ashkenaz, that are listed alongside Magog. In contrast, the name Rosh in Ezekiel 38:2, which some link to Russia, is argued by many scholars simply to mean chief, an adjective, not a proper noun. Identifying Gog with Russia is a relatively modern interpretation, popularized in the 19th and 20th centuries by some Christian futurists. Historically, Europeans more often saw themselves or their rivals as Gog and Magog. For instance, medieval Europeans saw Muslim armies of Mongols as Gog and Magog, while some of the Eastern world saw European crusaders as Gog and Magog. Historical actions, scale of invasion and coalition. Gog is to assemble a vast horde from many nations. Britain and France led the largest coalitions in history. Think of the British Empire's dominions and colonies on every continent, and France's global empire. At their height, the British and French empires together controlled over half of the world. They also fought in alliance in multiple world wars and colonial wars. The sun never sets on the British Empire, literally spanning the four corners of the earth. This globe reach is explicitly parallel to Revelation 20, verse 8, which calls Gog and Magog the nations in the four corners of the earth. No other powers have so thoroughly reached those four corners as Britain, other than America, which is really Britain, right? With its influence in North America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, and France. In Africa, Southeast Asia, Pacific, Caribbean. By contrast, Russia, even at the imperial zenith or during the Soviet era, was a contiguous land empire mainly in Eurasia, formidable regionally, but not truly worldwide in presence. Western Europe also repeatedly formed coalitions for war. The Crimean War Coalition, the World War I allies, World War II allies, NATO, etc. Gog's alliance in Ezekiel includes Persia, Kush, Sudan, Ethiopia, Libya, and others. Interestingly, Britain and France fought in or over all of these regions. Example, the British battles in Sudan and Libya in World War I and II. French in North Africa, both meddling in Persia and Iran. Russia did not engage those areas to the same extent. Thus, in terms of breadth of nations gathered and targets attacked, Britain and France fit the prophecy scope. Taking a spoil. Economic might and theft. Gog is motivated by what? Plunder, and Western Europe's wealth was built on what? Plunder. Britain and France drained colonies to enrich their homelands. To this day, the impact is seen in the vast wealth gap between Europe and Africa. Western corporations continue to extract African minerals, often under the inequitable terms set in the colonial era. Russia, while it had colonies in Central Asia and Siberia, did not extract on the same global scale. Its economy was not historically as dependent on overseas loot until perhaps recent oil and gas dealings. That's the whole Ukraine situation with Europe. Additionally, the transatlantic slave trade by Western powers was an unparalleled act of plunder of human souls, something Gog, the great oppressor, would have no hesitation in doing. It's telling that after slavery's abolition, European powers immediately turned to Africa itself for direct exploitation, the scramble, the drive to spoil the spoiled and prey the prey, never left. In sheer volume of spoil, taken, land, gold, people, artifacts, Britain and France outstripped any other contenders for the title of Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog will come back again to try and take the land, people, and resources once more, to enslave the true Israelites once more. Identity and deception. Western Europe's dominion came with a narrative. They claim to be bearers of Christianity and civilization, can we say democracy, even as they engaged in unchristian acts. Meanwhile, their Zionist partners claim to be the children of Israel, even as they often had to invent genealogies to cover their Khazar or European roots. This grand deception, Europeans posing as Israel's saviors and as Israel itself, is fitting for Gog and Magog, which in apocalyptic literature are forces of deception as well as destruction. Recall Satan deceives the nations called Gog and Magog, Revelation 20, verse 8. Britain and France portrayed their empires as benevolent mission, the white man's burden. Zionists portrayed their colonization of Palestine as a rightful return to their ancestral home. In truth, these were acts of conquest and usurpation. The real descendants of Israel, if one accepts the premise that many were among the African diaspora, were exploited and kept subjugated. Thus, Western Europe and Ashkenazi Zionism collectively fulfilled the prophecy, not only in brute force, but in spiritual falsehood and history. The real target, Jerusalem in the Ethiopian highlands. And remember, this is why they kept trying to conquer. I mean, it was the British tried to conquer Ethiopia. They couldn't do it. Italy came and tried to conquer. The real target is Jerusalem in Ethiopia. If one accepts the true Jerusalem is in Ethiopian highlands rather than a counterfeit in the so-called Palestine, then the direction of Gog and Magog's invasion must be reconsidered. Instead of coming from the far north of a fake Jerusalem, Britain and France, as leaders of the colonial world, are directly north of the Ethiopian highlands. So here's Europe right here, right? Here's Ethiopia. Here's the Ethiopian highlands, right? North is still Europe, right? Right here is still coming from the north of Africa. So Gog and Magog is going to come back from here and invade here. There is nothing here in the Middle East. There's nothing they want there. The best thing they got there is Gaza with an ocean view. But Africa has all the gold, all the silver, all the bauxite, everything that we talked about in the past, right? They come to take a spoil, right? Britain and France and all of the colonial powers controlled all of Africa and all of their resources. You have people like Ibrahim Traore that's kicking them out, and Africa is turning on them right now, and they're going to be kicked out, and they're going to become poverty-stricken. They're going to become third world nations, but their influence is still going to be there, and they're going to call and invade again in the future. They're the same people. Their heart is foul. They're the same wicked people that killed mommies and daddies and babies and destroy whole nations. Western Europe, particularly Britain and France, led the transatlantic slave trade, the colonialization of Africa, and the plunder of African resources. Ezekiel's prophecy states that Gog and Magog will come to take a spoil, and Western Europe has already done so through its centuries of gold, diamond, and resource theft, a future endeavor they will try to repeat. Britain's invasion of Ethiopia in 1868, its looting of Ethiopian treasures from Magdala, and France's control over regions near Ethiopia further demonstrate the colonial lust for Africa's wealth. There's nothing new under the sun, fam. As history shows, these nations have always desired to plunder and dominate the African continent. Given that prophecy states that Gog and Magog will attack after the true Israelites return to their land in fulfillment of Jeremiah 29:14, the most logical aggressors are the same colonial nations that stole the land and identity of the Israelites in the first place. In contrast, Russia, often singled out in the popular prophecy circles, lacks many of these qualifications. Russia did not build a maritime empire or lead a global coalition to colonize Africa. Geographically, Russia is northeast, but parts of Britain and France lie due north of the true Jerusalem in what is today known as Ethiopia. Culturally, Russia never embraced Gog and Magog imagery for themselves. If anything, during the Cold War, Western authors branded Russia as Magog, while Russians were largely unaware of the label. This Western-centric assignment hints that Gog and Magog might have been in the mirror all along for Europe. Finally, consider the current post-colonial influence. Britain and France still maintain outsized influence in the former colonies. The Commonwealth, Francophonie, military bases in Africa, currency controls like the CFA franc. They continue to benefit from African resources, oil, uranium, etc., from countries like Nigeria, Angola, Niger, Mali. This ongoing taking of spoils suggests Gog and Magog are still active. Meanwhile, these nations also strongly support the modern state of Israel, diplomatically and militarily, further entwining Western Europe with the pseudo-Israelite project. Why? Because they are all Germans. They're all Anglo-Saxons. They're all related. They're cousins. They're Gomer. They're Japhet. Russia, by comparison, had a minimal colonial footprint in Africa and today has limited ties to modern Israel. It sometimes opposes Western Middle East agendas. In some, when weighing biblical clues, historical deeds, and global impact, Western Europe, led by Britain and France, emerges as a far more compelling fulfillment of Gog and Magog than Russia ever has. They are the nations that gathered from the end of the earth, invaded the resting people, stole the treasure, and installed counterfeit regimes just as prophecy forewarns. They will also do this once more. One of their allies may be Ukraine, especially seeing them in the news about their war against Russia. This would tie the Khazarian land, Ukraine, or the Magogian land, because that's what it is, the land of Magog, to this mass invasion in the future with their German cousins in Western Europe. Just as NATO and the United States today want Ukrainian resources, they will be coming again for the resources of Africa, since they are currently being pushed out by leaders like Ibrahim Traore. Interestingly, Africa is calling its people back to the continent, which will definitely remove more Western European influence from Africa. When the people return to Africa, they will be at rest, and Western Europe will do what they have always done: kill, steal, enslave, and destroy, right? Ain't nothing new under the sun. Conclusion. The legends and legacies linking Britain and France to Gog and Magog are not mere curiosities, but pieces of a prophetic puzzle. From the British giants Gog and Magog symbolically guarding London, to the Japhite history of Anglo-Franks, tying them to Magog's kin or family or cousins, to the sweeping colonial conquest that saw Western armies encircle the globe like a cloud, the parallels are striking. Britain and France led missions of plunder and domination on an unprecedented scale, a true historical embodiment of Gog's campaign to take a spoil. With the collusion of the Ashkenazi Zionists, they not only seized lands and wealth, but also seized the identity of Yahuwah's people, attempting to recast the narrative of who Israel is. They will also recast their future plans as Gog and Magog to re-enslave the Israelites again and take back what they consider their resources. But Yahuwah's not going to allow it. Yeshua's going to step in, and that's where the whole Armageddon thing, and the Most High destroys them and destroys the Antichrist and all this stuff, right? So, if one shifts the prophetic lens away from Cold War biases and instead views the entire saga of European colonialism and world dominance as the drama of Gog and Magog, the pieces fall into place. The camp of the saints under siege can be seen as Africa and the true diaspora of Israel surrounded and exploited by the nations of Western Europe. The beloved city Jerusalem finds its echo both in the spiritual heart of Africa, Ethiopia and Zion, and in the literal city of Jerusalem, which was pried from its native custodians and handed to others. In both cases, Britain and France were at the forefront. Thus, the often repeated finger at Russia may be a red herring. The more insidious fulfillment of Gog and Magog has been unfolding via Western Europe for centuries. The prophetic outcome, however, is clear. Gog and Magog's triumph is short-lived. Eventually, divine justice falls, perhaps in the form of anti-colonial liberation, perhaps in yet future judgments, and the true people of Yahuwah are vindicated. But really, it's going to be Yahuwah himself who comes down and stop it. But according to the War Scrolls, it's going to come to a draw. It's going to come to a draw, and Yahuwah going to have to step in. but that's according to the War Scrolls. The theory presented here with historical citations and biblical correlations strongly support the thesis that Britain and France and their fellow Western powers best fit the bill as Gog and Magog in prophecy. Based on biblical geography, historical actions of colonialization, slavery, and the grand deception of identity. In the final reckoning, it will be seen that the ones who carried off the world's spoil and falsely wore the mantle of Israel were indeed Gog and Magog all along, and their fall will herald the restoration of truth for Jerusalem and the real Israel. The prophecy of Gog and Magog clearly with Britain and France, not Russia. These nations have a direct historical and biological connection to Gomer through Germany, as the Anglo-Saxons and Franks both trace their lineage back to the Germanic tribes, which themselves descend from Gomer. Britain and France, as the dominant colonial powers, led the charge in stealing the true Israelite identity and exploiting its people and resources. The imperialist actions throughout history reflect the very nature of Gog and Magog, and as prophecy unfolds, they will once again seek to reassert their dominance over a restored African Jerusalem. The only thing left is their final confrontation with Yahuwah himself. So, fam, what we're dealing with here is a story that goes all the way back of the seed of the woman fighting against the seed of the serpent. It comes full circle to a people whose identity was stolen. It comes full circle to Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9. It answers the question of why Britain was so eager to help the Jews get Palestine. It comes full circle and answers the question why Britain, the United States, right, and modern day Israel have a close alliance. It all comes together, the strategy and deception to steal the heritage and identity of a people who were taken into captivity. It comes full circle to describing why Africa to this day is oppressed by France and Britain and the colonial powers. It comes full circle to answer the question of Joel chapter 3 of why Yahuwah is mad with the people who took a girl for wine and a boy for a harlot. It comes full circle of why Yahuwah is judging the nations. It comes full circle of why in the end, when all of this is said and done, the same people who think they own Africa, the same people who think they own what they call African Americans, the same people who they think they own, who they call, British blacks, right? The same people who enslaved us and sent us into the four corners are the same people who are going to come back later on and say, you know what? We want the land back. As a matter of fact, not only do we want the land back, we want to enslave y'all again. As a matter of fact, not only do we want to make America great again, we want to make Europe great again. Come on now. And let's not forget the connection that Britain has with Gog and Magog in their founding as Albion. I mean, if you believe in coincidences, because I don't. So you have the connection between Britain and France, the Germanic tribes, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Ashkenazis, and the Khazars in the land of the Scythians, who many believed were Gog and Magog. It makes sense that this is the plan of Satan the whole time, and now we're starting to understand what's been going on for centuries. Now it makes sense why they hate us so much, because they want the promised land, which was given to us. It makes sense why they're trying to take Africa to this day, and why Ibrahim Traore, they tried to assassinate at least 20 times. But y'all want to be friends and get along. I get it. All I got to say is seek the Most High. Now, before I go, I did say I was going to ask a question or two. So if you want me to answer the question, put question in front of it, I'll answer. I'm not going to be long. Oh, yeah. Russia was on our side due to the Civil War. Russia was on our side to liberate Africa. Russia has always been on our side. Be honest, I believe even though the Russians are Japhetic, right? I don't think they're tied necessarily to Gomer, right? And to the descendants of the Khazars and Ashkenazi, that whole line. But, you know, hey, because there's something different about the Russians, because they have been allies. All right, so here's one question. Yakoba, isn't it true that Russia was on us? Okay, yeah. I just answered that one. All right, so let's see. Somebody else had another question. If you had it, I suggest you put it up now, because I'm not going to be long. All right. If y'all don't have no more questions, let's see, what was the question they asked? I think the question they asked was about Ethiopia attacking the Israelites. Well, see, this is the problem that we have. We got to understand the biblical terminologies and the people. Ethiopia just the term for Cush. So descendants of Cush is going to attack us. Ethiopia is what the Greeks called Africa, or Ethiops, the black-skinned ones. And then later on, Abyssinia was named Ethiopia. Okay, so it's not like Ethiopia as a nation is going to attack us. It's going to be Cushites that's going to attack us. So, all right. So who is Canaan in Genesis 9:27? That's Hamites. I'm not sure of that question. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. This is going to be uploaded at tailministry.com as a news article. So you could go and read it there. Okay, I'm going to take one or two more questions. What role do you believe Canada plays in relation to the Israelites? I think Canada going to be destroyed along with America. Because Canada ain't nothing but another British colony. That's my opinion. Did you know Poland helped Haiti during the revolution? No, I never knew that. That's interesting. Let's see. You got to be more specific for this question. Question Cushites. I'm not sure what that is. What you mean? Let's see. Is America trying to enslave us again? Yes, they are. They are. But they're going to push us out. I told y'all that. They're going to push us out. They can't do what they did in the past without getting pew-pewed, right? There's going to be some conflict. Don't get it twisted. There's going to be a civil and a WAR. It's going to happen soon. Let's see. Canada equal Babylon? She's just part of the Babylonian system. America is Canada and Canada is America. It's a facade. It's a facade. They all belong to the British Empire. All right, so let's see. Let's see. Did you see the video of the Netanyahu calling the Israelites the Antichrist? I ain't gonna lie. Some of them camps are Israelites. I ain't gonna lie. Some of them camps are Israelites. Look, you get mad at me all you want. I ain't gonna lie. Let's see. All right. What do you think of the idea of China and Russia trying to recolonize the real Israel? Well, here's the thing. It depends on your viewpoint, because I don't believe that's the case. Because Russia and China are not coming in with military forces to overthrow anybody. Russia and China have been forming economic alliances. Now, if you want to call that neo-colonialism, that's fine, but they're not coming in to do that. They're not taking over nations, right? China has one base. How many bases France have? How many bases Europe has in the U.S. in Africa alone, right? So I don't believe that. Let's see. Who is Esau? We got videos on that. So I know where the question comes from, and I'm going to try to answer what I think you're asking. So basically, when you look at Esau, right, because remember, Esau is the end of the world. Jacob is the beginning of that which follows, which means Esau is controlling the system. So how is it Japhet and how is it Gomer, right? And I'm going to tell you my viewpoint on it. And we've done studies on this. I believe at the head of this conquest, the head of this global empire is an Edomite. Now, he's probably white, mind you. I'm not saying he's colored. But in the past, they were black or brown or whatever. But I believe, as we know from Jubilees and other texts, that Zepho, who was an Edomite, one of the sons of Esau, took over Italia, which is Rome, right? And we know during the time of the Messiah that the Edomites, like Herod, were running Jerusalem. I believe that the top is controlled by an Edomite, and I believe that the rest of the people underneath are descendants of Japhet. They are Gomer and Togomer and all these people, right? So that's what I think is happening. And if you look at the trail and the historical connections and what happened in terms of prophecy and the pseudepigraphia and everything, then I believe Esau is the end of the world, right? And that Esau has controlled Rome, which is what we saw during the time of the Messiah. All right, so let's see. From the way things are going right now, when would you say it's likely for Gog and Magog to invade our land in Ezekiel 38 in terms of years? I talked about this before, Brother Sean, and I think it's going to be about 800 to 1,000 years before that happens. And the reason being is that the Gentiles are supposed to go into captivity, and they're going to get double what we have. So if we include that in terms of captivity, it's going to be at least 800 to 1,000 years before Armageddon, which occurs at the end before the Messiah return. All right, so let's see. Do you believe the world understands we are Israel or Yasharah? Can we say Ezra Alawi family? I'm just messing with y'all. Would be a cause for the great falling. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes. I think the great falling away has been happening, right? But oh yes. I think it's part of it. That's why you have so many right-wing people who are white supremacists now and marching with KKK banners and hoods on their heads today. That's why they hate black folks and want to get us all riled up so they could pew us in the street, but we won't take the bait. All right, let's see. Who are the Cushites? Well, the Cushites still exist over there in East Africa with all of those 80 to 100 something different ethnic groups. Many of the Cushites still exist in Sudan area and parts of Ethiopia and Eritrea. They're still there. Canaanites still there too in certain areas. But anyway. All right, I'm going to take one more question. Let's see. All right. Brother A said, do you think World War III would be the catalyst to free us completely? If we look at Jeremiah 50:51, America or Babylon is going to be getting invaded and we're going to leave. So I do believe it's going to be part of the catalyst. The concern I have is how we exit out and how many people we have to exit out. So what I think may happen is just what's been happening over the years. There's a progressive fleeing right now, right? There's people who know they're Israel who left and went to the continent. There are people who know they're Israel and have left and go to the continent. And I believe that's going to be progressively happening until, you know, I guess the crescendo happens during the time of the invasion of this country. So that's what I think. But you got to understand this too. There's a lot of people who are Israelites who are attacking those who want to go to the continent. And you got to be careful with that, who you're listening to, because a lot of people don't want you to go back. That's why I get so much heat on the flea doctrine. That's what they call it anyway. So you got to make sure you weigh the information that you're getting, because what I've noticed is that anyone that's trying to connect with the continent to bring the two sticks together, they're under attack. So that's all I got, fam. So if you got any other questions, just email me, you know, TOTW7101@gmail.com, and I'll try to get back to you. And if you want to support this ministry, you can by becoming a patron. You can also give $TOTW7101, $TOTW7101 if you want to give Cash App. Also, you could go to tailministries.com and go to the donations tab, and there's other ways to give. And also, if you want to, you know, support your brother Yacoba, you could buy my book. I'm going to tell you this. I think most people understand that what I say about Jerusalem is correct, right? Once you read the book, I don't think you're going to have any doubt. And there's, you know, the brothers I've been working with, we'll probably come together one day and put all of the other stuff we've learned since I wrote my book that even gives more credence to that area being the true Jerusalem. I mean, I have no doubt personally, right? I have no doubt. I mean, there's just too much evidence. It's just overwhelming. But those who don't want to read the book, you'll never find out and never convince yourself, right? So that's cool too, right? You could stay in your deception, but if you want to know the truth, check it out. So that's all I got, fam. Love y'all with the love of Messiah. Peace and blessings, Israel. Your captivity is ending.